In the heart of America's breadbasket, where endless cornfields stretch toward the horizon, Jack Mitchell's weathered hands tell a story of 20 years fixing broken dreams from his rusting pickup truck. When a call comes in about a broken-down tractor on the outskirts of town, he drives out expecting just another patch job to keep the lights on. There, beneath the scorching midday sun, he finds a modest woman in mud-stained work boots, standing beside the sorriest-looking tractor he's ever seen. With skilled hands and quiet determination, he works through the day, breathing life back into the battered machine, unaware that this simple service call is about to change everything. The quiet woman with calloused hands and knowing eyes isn't just another farmer. She's Catherine Wells, the richest farm owner in America. Could one day's honest work be the seed that grows into a lifetime of happiness? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening sun cast long shadows across Jack Mitchell's workshop as he rolled his toolbox back into its familiar corner. Grease-stained invoices scattered across his desk told the story of another month barely scraping by. 20 years of fixing farm equipment had taught him that a mechanic's ledger was written in rust and promises. Mostly promises these days. He picked up the latest bill from Johnson's feed supply. Parts needed, $247.83. Below it, in his own careful handwriting, labor when harvest comes in. It joined a stack of similar IOUs, each one representing a farmer he couldn't bring himself to turn away. His father's voice echoed in his memory. In farming country, Mitchell, you're only as good as your word and your work. The workshop itself was a testament to that philosophy. Where other repair shops had gone digital, Jack's walls still held the hand-drawn diagrams his father had made, showing the inner workings of every tractor model from 1960 forward. The pegboard above his workbench displayed tools that had been passed down through 2 generations, each one worn smooth with use and care. His phone buzzed, another text from the bank about his mortgage payment. Jack sighed, rubbing his calloused hands across 3 days of stubble. The truth was, being good at your word and your work didn't mean much when corporate farms were swallowing up family operations faster than kudzu claiming an abandoned field. Last month, the Phillips place had sold 3 generations of farming, ended with a corporate signature. Their equipment, still bearing his repair tags, had been hauled away to auction. The replacement machines were all new, all identical, all serviced by dealership technicians who'd never set foot in local soil. Jack walked to his father's old desk, pulling open the bottom drawer where he kept the shop's original ledger. The leather-bound book fell open to familiar pages, his father's precise handwriting recording decades of repairs. March 15th, 1982, fixed Tom Miller's combine. Payment, half a hog at slaughter. Some entries were marked simply with a dash, his father's code for repairs done for free when times were hard. He'd added his own entries over the years, watching as cash payments gradually replaced the bartered goods and services that had once been the currency of rural life. These days, even cash was becoming rare, replaced by promises of payment that grew more uncertain with each passing season. Outside, a harvest moon was rising over the cornfields, painting the world in shades of amber and shadow. Jack's truck, a '95 Ford that had seen better decades, sat in the gravel lot beside the shop. Its bed was a mobile repair unit, tools and parts organized with the precision of a surgeon's kit. Tomorrow he'd be back out there, making his rounds to farms that couldn't afford dealership rates, keeping ancient equipment running through one more season. The letter from the bank sat unopened on his desk, its contents all too predictable. 3 months behind on the shop's mortgage, and the vultures were circling. He'd seen it happen to too many others. Family businesses swallowed up by progress, replaced by efficiency and automation that somehow never seemed to benefit the people who'd worked the land for generations. But tonight, something felt different. That service call to the Wells place had been unusual. The woman who'd called him out, Catherine, she'd said her name was, there was something about her that didn't quite fit the picture. Her hands were workers' hands, no doubt about that. But her eyes, they'd seen more than just Nebraska soil. Jack locked up the shop, his father's old keys heavy in his pocket. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. For tonight, he had a clutch to rebuild for the Andersons' tractor and his own. Memories to keep him company. In farming country, sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive through one more season. Catherine Wells stood at the window of her modest farmhouse office, watching the mechanic's old Ford disappear down the dusty access road. His skilled repair of her father's vintage tractor had impressed her more than she'd expected. In a world of disposable everything, Jack Mitchell was a craftsman of the old school, the kind her grandfather would have appreciated. She turned to face the small room that served as her private sanctuary. To any visitor, it looked like a typical farmer's office, weather-beaten desk, agricultural almanacs, and a wall calendar marked with planting schedules. But behind the carefully curated simplicity lay the command center of a $12 billion agricultural empire. Thomas Anderson, her CFO and oldest friend, sat in the worn leather chair by her desk, tablet in hand. The board won't like you. Working with local mechanics, Catherine. We have maintenance contracts with John Deere that cover all our operations. The board doesn't run this farm, Thomas. I do. Catherine's voice was quiet but firm. She walked to the old oak filing cabinet and pulled out a worn photograph. 3 generations of Wells stood proud before the same barn, visible from her window. Her grandfather in overalls, her father in a business suit, and herself as a teenager, already showing the determination that would define her life. This farm isn't just another asset on our balance sheet. It's where everything started, where grandfather taught me that the soil doesn't care about stock prices or quarterly reports. It only cares about how you tend it, Thomas sighed, a sound heavy with 20 years of similar conversations. And that's why you still drive tractors yourself and hire local mechanics when we have a fleet of certified technicians on standby? Catherine smiled, touching the glass over her grandfather's face. That's exactly why. Every corporate farm we acquire, every family operation we absorb, they all started just like this one, with people who knew every inch of their land, every quirk of their machinery. Her phone buzzed with another series of urgent messages from corporate headquarters in Chicago. Board meetings, acquisition proposals, sustainability reports. The endless machinery of modern agribusiness. But here, in this room that still smelled of leather and old paper, Catherine kept her connection to the earth itself. Run Mitchell's. Background for me, she said, returning to her desk. Full profile. Thomas raised an eyebrow. The mechanic? Catherine, please tell me you're not planning another one of your projects. She logged into her secure terminal, bringing up satellite views of the county's farming operations. Did you watch him work today? Really watch him? He didn't just fix the tractor, he understood it, talked to it, the way grandfather used to. He's also 3 months behind on his shop's mortgage, Thomas reported, scanning through records on his tablet. Credits stretched thin. No major violations or liens, but he's definitely feeling the squeeze from the corporatization of local agriculture. Catherine nodded, her mind already mapping possibilities. And how many independent repair operations are left in a 100-mile radius? 3, down from 28 when you took over as CEO. Thomas's tone made it clear he knew where this was heading. The board's modernization initiative has left us with efficient operations but dying communities. Catherine pulled up another screen, this one showing employment statistics for rural counties. We're not just losing farms, Thomas. We're losing knowledge, skills, the kind of expertise you can't download from a corporate database. The sun was setting now, painting the cornfields gold. Somewhere out there, Jack Mitchell was probably working late in his shop, keeping another piece of vital equipment running for another struggling farmer, just as her grandfather had taught her. The land didn't care about your profit margins. It cared about how you tended it. "Start the paperwork," she said finally, "but keep it quiet. I want to see what else Mr. Mitchell can fix before we show our hand." Thomas stood, shaking his head with the weary affection of an old friend. "Just remember, Catherine, not everyone wants to be saved, especially not the proud ones." After he left, Catherine returned to the window. The vintage tractor sat in the yard, running as smoothly as it had in her father's day. Some things, she reflected, were worth preserving, some skills were worth saving, and sometimes the best way to honor the past was to give it a future. 3 days after fixing the vintage tractor, Jack found himself back at the Wells farm. This time, it was a combine harvester giving trouble. "Nothing urgent," Catherine had said on the phone, but if he had time to take a look, she'd appreciate it. Something about the way she described the machine's symptoms told him she knew more about engines than most farmers these days. He pulled his repair manual from the truck's glove compartment, a battered notebook his father had started in 1975. Pages yellow with age and spotted with oil stains. Each entry represented a problem solved, a lesson learned, annotated with the kind of practical wisdom you couldn't find in factory service guides. Catherine was waiting by the equipment barn, dressed in work clothes that had seen real use. "The timing's off," she said without preamble. "You can hear it in the secondary drive. Sounds like my grandfather's old pocket watch when the mainspring was slipping." Jack raised an eyebrow, impressed by the precision of her diagnosis. "Most. People just said it was making a funny noise. Mind if I listen to it run?" She climbed into the operator's seat with the ease of long practice, bringing the huge machine to life. Jack closed his eyes, letting the complex symphony of mechanical sounds wash over him. There it was. The slight hesitation she'd described, almost imperceptible unless you knew what you were hearing. "Your grandfather taught you about engines?" he asked as she shut it down. A shadow of something, memory, maybe loss, crossed her face. "Everything I know about farming, really." He believed. "You couldn't manage what you didn't understand." Jack opened his father's notebook, finding the section on timing adjustments. Catherine came to look over his shoulder, and he caught a hint of engine oil mixed with something floral, a combination that seemed to sum her up somehow. "That's beautiful," she said, pointing to a detailed hand-drawn diagram. "Modern manuals don't show the soul of the machine like that. Dad always said every piece of equipment had its own personality. You had to learn its language." Jack traced the familiar lines of his father's careful draftsmanship. "These newer machines, all computerized, sometimes I think we're losing something important." Catherine's eyes met his, and for a moment he saw an unexpected depth of understanding. "That's exactly what I've been thinking." They worked together. Through the afternoon, Jack making adjustments while Catherine handed him tools with the natural rhythm of someone who'd done her share of repairs. She asked intelligent questions about his methods, shared stories about equipment she'd helped restore over the years, and displayed a knowledge of agricultural machinery that went far beyond the usual farmer's experience. "Most people these days would have called the dealer," Jack said as he made a final timing adjustment. "Probably would have recommended replacing half the drivetrain." Catherine's face darkened slightly. "I've seen too many farms go under from that kind of advice. Buy new, scrap the old, take out bigger loans. It's not sustainable." The conviction in her voice resonated with something in Jack's chest. He'd had the same thoughts, watching family farms disappear one by one, replaced by corporate operations that treated machinery like disposable parts in a profit machine. "My father used to say," he found himself sharing, "the difference between a good mechanic and a parts replacer is that a good mechanic listens to what the machine is trying to tell them." Catherine smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her whole face. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." He was. Jack closed his notebook, running his hand over its worn cover. "Taught me everything I know about fixing things, and about fixing them right, even when it would be easier to just patch them. Up and move on." The sun was setting as they tested the combine's timing one last time. The big machine purred like a satisfied cat, its various drives now perfectly synchronized. Catherine's obvious pleasure in the sound made Jack feel a pride he hadn't experienced in his work for a long time. As he packed his tools, she handed him an envelope. "You do good work, Jack. The kind that's getting hard to find these days." The praise felt different coming from her, weighted somehow, as if she understood exactly what it meant to maintain standards in a world that increasingly valued speed over quality. Driving home, Jack realized he'd spent the entire afternoon talking freely with a woman who, despite her practical knowledge and worked hands, remained something of a mystery. There was a depth to Catherine Wells that didn't quite fit with the simple farmer she appeared to be. But then again, he reflected, the best machines often hid their complexity behind a simple exterior. Maybe people were the same way. The Chicago Boardroom gleamed with corporate precision, all glass, chrome, and power. 40 stories above Michigan Avenue, Catherine Wells sat at the head of a table worth more than most of the tractors she'd driven that week. Her tailored suit felt stiff after days in work clothes, but she wore it like armor. "Miss Wells," David Harrison, head of operations, tapped his tablet meaningfully. "These maintenance costs are unsustainable. Your personal farm is operating at 38% higher overhead than our standard operations." Personal farm, as if the land her grandfather had worked with his own hands was some sort of hobby. Catherine kept her face neutral, a skill learned through years of being the only woman in rooms like this. "That facility serves as our research and development center for sustainable farming practices." Research. Harrison's smile was expensively crafted, with outdated equipment and local repair services. "Our contract with Agritech provides state-of-the-art machinery and maintenance across all properties." Catherine opened a folder on her laptop, displaying productivity figures. "The Wells Heritage Farm has maintained consistent yield rates while reducing chemical inputs by 22%. Our soil quality metrics are the highest in the region." Thomas, sitting to her right, smoothly picked up her thread. "The data suggests that integrating traditional methods with modern technology actually increases long-term sustainability. Several agricultural universities have requested to study our approach." But Harrison wasn't finished. "The board is concerned about more than just one farm's metrics, Miss Wells. We're an agricultural empire. Your father built this company by modernizing, by economies of scale. Now you're letting sentiment, I'm letting experience guide my decisions." Catherine cut in, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of generations. "My grandfather understood something we're in danger of forgetting. Farming isn't just about this quarter's profits. It's about maintaining the land for generations to come." The meeting droned on, a battle Catherine had fought countless times since inheriting control of Wells' agricultural holdings. The board saw numbers, efficiency ratings, profit margins. They didn't see the communities dying as family farms were, swallowed up, the knowledge lost as skilled workers were replaced by automated systems. Back in her executive suite, she stood at the window, looking south toward the distant Illinois farmland. Thomas brought her coffee, black, in a ceramic mug, not the designer cups preferred by her staff. "Harrison's pushing for full automation at all properties," he reported. "He's got 3 board members backing him." Catherine sipped her coffee, thinking of Jack Mitchell's careful hands bringing her father's tractor back to life. "How many independent repair shops have we put out of business this year?" 17 across our operating regions. Thomas didn't need to check his notes. "Most couldn't compete with the corporate service contracts." She turned from the window. "Pull me the files on all remaining independent mechanical services in our areas. Focus on shops with multi-generational history, proven track records." "Catherine," Thomas's voice held warning, "the board won't approve any deviation from the Agritech contract. The board doesn't need to know." She sat at her desk, determination settling over her like a familiar coat. "We'll structure it through the Wells Family Trust. My grandfather left me more than just shares in this company. He left me his vision of what farming could be." Her computer chimed with another report demanding attention. Somewhere, 40 stories. Below, Chicago traffic flowed like a river of steel and glass, as far removed from Nebraska soil as her corporate life was from the truth of who she really was. "Jack Mitchell," she said almost to herself. "What do we know about his father's shop?" Thomas pulled up a file. "Mitchell and Son Mobile Repair, established 1962. Known for quality work, fair prices. The father died 3 years ago, leaving significant debt from medical bills. Jack's been keeping it afloat somehow, mostly through informal arrangements with local farmers." Catherine nodded, a plan forming in her mind. The kind of arrangements my grandfather used to make. Skills passed down, knowledge shared, communities supported. She looked at the corporate logo dominating her office wall. "Sometimes the old ways aren't just sentiment, Thomas. They're wisdom we've forgotten." The afternoon sun caught the silver. Threads in her hair, earned as much from board meetings as from working under the Nebraska sky. In her mind, she could still hear Jack Mitchell talking about machines having souls, about listening to what they were trying to tell you. Some things were worth preserving, even if the board couldn't see their value on a balance sheet. Over the next 2 weeks, Jack's phone rang with surprising regularity. Each call came from a different farm in the area, each with equipment problems that seemed just a little too specific to be coincidence. Not that he was complaining. Work was work, and these days that was precious enough. Today's job brought him to the Peterson place, where an old grain auger had mysteriously seized up. Sarah Peterson, a widow who'd been running the farm single-handed since her husband's passing, met him at the drive. "Catherine Wells recommended you," she said, wringing weathered hands. "Said you were the only one who might be able to save it." "I can't afford a new one, Mr. Mitchell, not this year." Jack nodded, understanding the fear behind her words. One major equipment failure could spell disaster for a small farm these days. "Let's take a look before we talk about replacing anything." The auger's problem turned out to be complex, but fixable, if you knew where to look and had the patience to try. Jack spent hours disassembling the drive mechanism, cleaning decades of accumulated grain dust from places it shouldn't have been, and carefully rebuilding the whole system. All the while, he felt Sarah Peterson watching him with the desperate hope of someone down to their last chance. "Most folks would have told me to scrap it," she said, as he finished the final adjustments. Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "Most folks don't remember when farmers had to fix things instead of replacing them. My father used to say that the difference between a good mechanic and a parts replacer is knowing when something's truly broken." A familiar voice finished his sentence. He turned to find Catherine Wells leaning against the barn door, dressed in her usual work clothes. Something in her expression suggested she'd been watching him work for quite a while. "Miss Wells," Sarah straightened up. "I didn't expect just checking in on a few farms in the area," Catherine said easily. "How's that auger running, Jack?" He demonstrated the repair, noting how Catherine's eyes followed his movements with focused intelligence. She asked technical questions that revealed a deep understanding of the machinery, questions that seemed almost like a test. Later, as he was packing up his tools, Catherine walked him to his truck. "You didn't tell her to buy a new one," she observed. "Didn't need one." Jack shrugged. "Sometimes the old equipment just needs someone willing to listen to what it's trying to tell you." And what was this one telling you? That it had more life in it, that someone had maintained it well for years before things got tight. He glanced back at the Peterson farm, that maybe what it needed was just a little care, not a complete replacement. Catherine nodded slowly. "You know, I've had 3 different corporate consultants tell me that maintaining older equipment is inefficient, that the smart move is to standardize, modernize, replace anything over 5 years old." "Yeah, well." Jack closed his toolbox with a decisive click. "Consultants don't have to look a farmer in the eye and tell them to take out another loan they can't afford." Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. A hydraulic system on the Thompson place that everyone else had declared hopeless. A transmission problem at Old Man Johnson's that had stumped the dealership mechanics. Each time, Jack found himself working under the curious eyes of farmers who'd been told their equipment was beyond saving, and more often than not, Catherine Wells would appear at some point during the repair, watching, asking questions, testing his knowledge in ways that might have seemed casual if they hadn't been so specific. It was after fixing a particularly tricky electrical system on a combine, one that had him referencing his father's old notebooks for hours, that Jack finally called her on it. "These aren't random breakdowns, are they?" he asked as they stood in the gathering dusk. Catherine's smile held a hint of approval. "Does it matter?" He thought about Sarah Peterson's relieved tears, about Old Man Johnson's triumphant grin when his tractor roared back to life. "Guess it matters more why you're doing it. Because some things are worth saving," she said simply. "Some skills shouldn't be lost just because they're not on a corporate efficiency chart." She left him standing there wondering just what kind of test he was really taking and what passing it might mean. The Bell and Whistle Diner had been serving breakfast to Nebraska farmers since 1955, and if there was one thing that hadn't changed in all those years, it was how news traveled. Jack sat in his usual booth, coffee growing cold as he half listened to the morning's gossip. "Did you see the article in the Herald?" Bill Thompson's voice carried from the counter. "Wells Agricultural Holdings just bought out 3 more farms in Henderson County. Corporate farming's creeping closer. Mark my words." "Funny thing about that Wells place," Ed Miller chimed in, sliding onto the stool next to Bill. "My cousin works for the county assessor's office. Says that farms been buying up equipment from failed operations all over the state. Not scrapping it neither, storing it in those big barns they built last spring." Jack stirred his coffee, remembering the carefully maintained vintage machines he'd seen on Catherine's farm. Before he could stop himself, he spoke up. "Maybe they're preserving it. Not everything needs to be scrapped just because it's old." The diner went quiet enough to hear the griddle sizzling in the kitchen. Bill Thompson turned slowly on his stool. "You've been spending a lot of time out at that Wells place lately, Jack. Getting awful defensive about them, aren't you?" "I fix machines, Bill. Don't matter who owns them." But even as he said it, Jack knew it wasn't entirely true. There was something different about working for Catherine, something that went beyond just repairing equipment. Mary, the waitress, who'd known Jack since he was a boy, refreshed his coffee with a knowing look. "That Wells woman's been sending you a lot of work, hasn't she? Heard Sarah Peterson singing your praises about fixing her auger. Said Miss Wells recommended you special." The bell above the diner door chimed, and conversation suddenly shifted to safer topics as Thomas Anderson, Catherine's right-hand man, walked in. Jack had seen him occasionally at the farm, always watching from a distance, always taking notes. On his tablet, "Mr. Mitchell." Thomas nodded as he passed Jack's booth. "Good work on the Peterson equipment." Miss Wells was impressed. The diner's silence took on a different quality, the kind that preceded a storm. After Thomas collected his to-go order and left, the whispers started again, more urgent this time. "Corporate spy, that one," Ed Miller muttered. "Checking out who's vulnerable for takeover, I'll bet." Jack pushed his plate away, appetite gone. He'd known these people all his life, fixed their equipment, helped them through hard seasons. Now they were looking at him like he'd crossed some invisible line. Outside, the morning paper lay abandoned on a nearby table. The headline caught his eye. "Wells Agricultural Holdings expands Midwest operations." Below it, a photo of a corporate boardroom, all steel and glass, nothing like the warm, lived-in office where he'd last seen Catherine reviewing repair logs. He was still staring at the paper when Sarah Peterson's ancient pickup rattled into the parking lot. She hurried into the diner, making straight for his booth. "Jack, I had to tell you, that auger you fixed, it's running better than when Joe was alive." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Miss Wells came by yesterday, asked all about it. Then she offered to have her crew help with harvest this year, no charge. Said it was part of some new community support program." The diner had gone quiet again, but this time the silence held a note of confusion. Corporate farms didn't offer free harvest help. They didn't repair old equipment or care about widow farmers making it through another season. "There's something different about that Wells place," Mary said thoughtfully, topping off Jack's coffee again. "My Bobby applied for work there last week. Instead of sending him to some corporate HR, Miss Wells interviewed him herself, spent an hour talking about his grandpa's farming methods." Jack thought about Catherine's careful questions, her genuine interest in old repair techniques, the way she handled tools with the ease of someone who'd grown up using them. Nothing about her fit the corporate farmer image. And yet, that newspaper, Infoto, nagged at him. "All I know," he said finally, "is she's keeping equipment running that everyone else said to scrap, helping folks who'd be lost without it." He stood, leaving money for his breakfast. "Maybe, instead of worrying about what she might be, we should pay attention to what she's actually doing." But as he drove to his next job, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Catherine Wells was either the most hands-on corporate farmer in history, or she was playing a much deeper game, and somehow he'd become part of it. The magazine sat innocently on Jack's workbench, left behind by a parts supplier. Agricultural Business Weekly splashed across its glossy cover, and there she was, Catherine Wells, dressed in an elegant business suit, standing in front of a corporate logo he'd seen in the newspaper. America's wealthiest farmer. How Catherine Wells is revolutionizing modern agriculture. His coffee mug slipped from suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the concrete floor. The sound matched something breaking inside him. Trust, maybe, or the simple certainty of who she was. The article laid it all out in clean corporate prose. Catherine Wells, CEO of Wells Agricultural Holdings, controlling over $12 billion in farmland and agricultural operations. The largest private farming enterprise in North America. The corporate giant that had been swallowing family farms across 7 states. Jack's hand shook as he read about their modernization initiative and efficiency-driven consolidation strategy. Every warm conversation they'd shared, every moment of apparent understanding, now felt like moves in some elaborate corporate game. His phone buzzed, Catherine's number. For the first time, he let it go to voicemail. The autumn sun was setting when he heard her truck pull up outside his shop. He didn't turn around as the door opened, keeping his eyes fixed on the dismantled transmission he'd been trying to fix. "For hours, you didn't answer your phone." Her voice was the same, that mix of strength and gentleness he'd grown to trust. But now he heard other things in it. Education, power, the weight of billions. "Been busy." He reached for a wrench, still not looking at her. "Lot of old equipment out there needing fixes, though I guess you'd rather see it all replaced with new corporate fleet machines." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to sink into the concrete floor. When Catherine finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "Is that what you think? That everything we've talked about, everything I believe in, was just some corporate act?" "I don't know what to think." Jack turned to face her, gesturing at the magazine. "CEO of Wells Agricultural Holdings, $12 billion. All those farms you've bought up, all those families pushed out. Was this some kind of research project? Study how the simple rural folk fix their tractors?" Catherine's face showed pain, but she didn't flinch. "You're right. I should have told you everything from the start, but I needed to know." "What?" Jack cut in. "If I was worth adding to your corporate collection, another piece of quaint rural expertise to catalogue before it disappears. If you were real," the words burst from her with unexpected force. "If you were actually what I hoped you were, someone who understood that farming isn't just about efficiency and quarterly reports, someone who could help me prove that the old ways still have value." She walked to his workbench, picking up his father's notebook with careful hands. "Do you know what the board wants? To scrap every piece of equipment more than 5 years old. To standardize everything, computerize everything. They think farming is just inputs and outputs, numbers on a spreadsheet." "And what do you think it is?" Jack asked, something in her passion making him want to understand, despite his anger. Catherine's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw the full weight she carried. "I think it's my grandfather teaching me to listen to engine sounds when I was 10. It's your father passing down generations of knowledge in this notebook. It's Sarah Peterson crying because you fixed an auger instead of telling her to take out another loan." She laid the notebook down gently. "Yes, I'm the CEO. Yes, I'm wealthy beyond anything that makes sense. But this farm, these machines, the skills people like you have, they matter. I'm trying to preserve something precious before it's lost forever." Jack leaned against his workbench, feeling the solid wood his father had worn smooth over decades. Why the deception? Why not just tell me? Would you have treated me the same, talked to me the same, been yourself? She smiled sadly. "The minute people know who I am, I stop being Catherine and become Miss Wells, the corporate billionaire. I needed to know if there were still people who understood farming the way my grandfather did." The sun had set completely now, leaving them in the dim light of the shop's old fluorescent tubes. Jack looked at his hands, grease-stained and calloused, then at Catherine, really looking this time. Past the corporate power, past the wealth, to the woman who knew exactly how a grandfather's watch sounded when its mainspring was slipping. "So what happens now?" he asked finally. "That depends," she said softly, "on whether you're willing to hear the whole story, and whether you still believe that some things are worth saving." Dawn found Jack in his father's old office, surrounded by photographs that traced 3 generations of the Mitchell family keeping farmers' equipment running. His grandfather fixing a thresher in 1938, his father teaching him to rebuild an engine. In 1985, Jack himself, barely teenage, proudly holding up his first successful repair job. The morning paper lay unopened on the desk, but he didn't need to read it. He'd spent half the night researching Wells Agricultural Holdings, tracking its expansion across the Midwest. The numbers were staggering: hundreds of thousands of acres, state-of-the-art facilities, fleet contracts with every major equipment manufacturer. And at the center of it all, Catherine Wells, the woman who got her hands dirty fixing tractors, was also the executive whose company had transformed American agriculture. The same person who talked about preserving old skills commanded an empire built on modernization. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Thomas Anderson stood there, impeccable in a suit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly income. "Miss Wells would like you to see something," Thomas said, his corporate polish at odds with the rustic repair shop. "If you're willing." Part of Jack wanted to refuse, to retreat into the simple certainty of his work, but the larger part, the part that had seen something genuine in Catherine's eyes last night, made him reach for his keys. Thomas directed him to a location he'd never visited on the Wells property, a cluster of newly constructed buildings set back from the main farm. Inside the largest building, Jack stopped dead in his tracks. The space was filled with lovingly restored vintage farm equipment, tractors from every era, gleaming with careful maintenance, combines that traced the evolution of mechanical harvesting. Each piece was not just preserved, but fully operational, maintained to the highest standards. "Catherine calls it the Heritage Collection," Thomas said quietly. "Every piece saved from farms being sold off or modernized. The board thinks it's her expensive hobby. They don't understand what she's trying to preserve." Jack walked slowly through the rows of machinery, his mechanic's eye noting the quality of restoration. "This isn't corporate efficiency." "No." Catherine's voice came from behind him. She'd arrived silently, dressed in her working clothes. "This is my grandfather's legacy, and yours, and every farmer who ever passed down knowledge through generations." She led him to a particular tractor, a 1962 model he recognized immediately. "This was my grandfather's first major purchase. The bank told him he was foolish, that he should buy newer equipment, but he believed in maintaining things, in understanding how they worked." She ran her hand along the well-preserved hood. "Sound familiar?" Jack thought of his father's notebooks, of lessons learned through grease and persistence. "Why didn't you tell me about all this?" "Because I needed to know if there were still people who understood the value of what we're losing." She turned to face him, The board sees agriculture as a mathematical equation: inputs, outputs, profit margins. They don't see the knowledge disappearing, the skills being lost. Every time we replace a repairable machine with a computerized black box, we lose something precious. "And what am I in all this?" Jack asked, the question that had kept him awake all night. "Another exhibit in your museum?" Catherine's eyes flashed with something like hurt. "You're proof that I'm not crazy. That there are still people who understand what my grandfather taught me. That farming isn't just about efficiency. It's about knowledge passed down, skills preserved, communities maintained." Thomas discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone among the restored machines. Jack walked to a nearby workbench, noting the carefully organized tools, the repair manuals, both old and new. "I've spent my whole life fixing things," he said finally. "Machines mostly, but also trying to fix situations for farmers who can't afford new equipment, trying to fix a way of life that's disappearing." He turned to Catherine. "How do you fix something this big?" "Not alone," she answered simply. "That's what I've learned. The board thinks I'm sentimental, holding on to outdated methods, but they don't see what's being lost. I can't preserve this knowledge by myself, Jack. I need people who understand its value." The morning sun streamed through the building's windows, catching the polished metal of decades of agricultural history. Jack thought about Sarah Peterson's tears of relief, about Old Man Johnson's pride in keeping his father's tractor running, about Catherine Wells, who could have bought any equipment she wanted but chose to maintain a connection to something deeper. "Understanding its value is one thing," he said slowly, "but what can we actually do about it?" Catherine's smile held both hope and challenge. "Want to help me find out?" Catherine's office was a study in contrasts. Modern laptops sat beside vintage repair manuals. Corporate reports shared space with soil samples. Through the window, Jack could see both the Heritage Collection's buildings and the gleaming new grain silos in the distance. "What do you see when you look at modern farming?" Catherine asked, spreading a map across her desk. Red dots marked Wells Agricultural Holdings properties across 7 states. "Most people see efficiency, technology, progress, but I see something else." She pointed to a cluster of dots. "Every red mark represents a family farm absorbed by corporate agriculture. Equipment scrapped, skills lost, communities fractured." Her finger traced a pattern across the Midwest. "But what if we could do something different?" Thomas entered silently, placing a thick folder on her desk. "The preliminary numbers you asked for." Catherine opened the folder, revealing financial projections and organizational charts. Wells Agricultural Holdings has the resources to buy virtually any farm in the Midwest. The board sees this as a path to total market control. She looked up at Jack. "I see it as an opportunity to save something precious." "Save what exactly?" Jack asked, though something in him was beginning to understand. "Knowledge, skills, community." Catherine pulled out a different document, a business plan written in her own hand. "I'm proposing a new division within the company, not focused on acquisition and modernization, but on preservation and education." The plan laid out a vision that made Jack's breath catch. A network of repair centers across the Midwest, staffed by experienced mechanics teaching traditional skills alongside modern techniques. Programs to help small farmers maintain and repair their equipment rather than replace it. Apprenticeships passing down generations of agricultural knowledge. "The board will hate it," Thomas observed mildly. "The board doesn't understand what we're losing," Catherine countered. "Every time a family farm fails, every time a repair shop closes, we lose more than just business entities. We lose knowledge that took generations to accumulate." She turned to Jack. "I want you to help me build this, not as an employee, but as a partner. Your skills, your understanding of both the technical and human sides of farming, that's exactly what this program needs." Jack picked up the business plan, reading details that made his head spin. The budget alone was more money than he'd seen in his life. "Why me?" "Because you understand what matters." Catherine's voice was soft but certain. "I've watched you work. You don't just fix machines, you teach their owners. You preserve knowledge. You maintain not just equipment, but hope." She stood, walking to a photo on her wall, her grandfather standing proud beside his first tractor. "I could hire 100 corporate efficiency experts, but I need someone who understands that the most efficient solution isn't always the right one. Someone who knows why it matters that Sarah Peterson can keep her auger running, that old man Johnson can maintain his father's tractor. And what happens to my shop?" Jack asked, thinking of his father's notebooks, his grandfather's tools. "It becomes our first training center," Catherine said. "A place where new mechanics can learn from experience, where farmers can learn to maintain their own equipment, where we start preserving skills instead of just preserving machines." Thomas cleared his throat softly. "The initial funding is already arranged through the Wells Family Trust. The board can't block it." Jack looked down at his hands, calloused, oil-stained, capable, hands that knew how to fix broken things. He thought about all the farms he'd visited, all the equipment he'd kept running past its efficient lifespan, about young farmers who needed to learn these skills but had nowhere to turn. "This isn't just about machines, is it?" he asked finally. Catherine smiled, understanding in her eyes. "It never was. Machines we can replace, but the knowledge of how to keep them running, how to adapt them, how to teach others, that's irreplaceable. That's what I'm trying to save." She held out her hand. "Will you help me?" The morning sun caught the metal of her grandfather's tractor in the Heritage Collection, sending a gleam through the window. Jack thought about his own father, about lessons learned and passed down, about the possibility of passing them on to a new generation. He reached for her hand. The news spread through the farming community like wildfire through dry grass. Jack Mitchell's repair shop was expanding, backed by Wells money. Some called it a sellout. Others saw hope. But everyone had an opinion, and the Bell and Whistle diner buzzed with speculation. Jack stood before the gathered crowd in his newly renovated shop, trying not to fidget under the scrutiny of people he'd known all his life. The familiar space had been transformed, new equipment alongside carefully preserved older tools, teaching stations set up where his father's ancient workbenches had stood. "Some of you are wondering what's going on here," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Whether this means Mitchell & Son is becoming another corporate operation." He gestured to the wall where his father's repair manual still held. "Pride of place. It's not. It's becoming something else, something my father always wanted." Catherine stepped forward, dressed not in corporate attire, but in her working clothes. "We're creating a place where knowledge doesn't get lost, where experienced mechanics can teach their skills to the next generation, where farmers can learn to maintain their own equipment." Old man Johnson spoke up from the back. "Heard Wells Agricultural was buying up every farm they could get. This some kind of trick to get us to trust you before you swoop in?" "No trick," Catherine replied calmly. "Yes, Wells Agricultural is expanding, but not every farm needs to become a corporate operation. Sometimes what they need is support to stay independent." She nodded to Thomas, who opened the shop's side door. Outside, a line of restored equipment stood gleaming in the morning sun, machines that many had declared beyond repair. "Every piece here was saved from the scrapyard," Jack explained. "Restored not just to working condition, but to teaching condition. Each one represents skills that shouldn't be lost." Sarah Peterson pushed forward, examining a familiar auger. "That's Joe's old machine, the one you fixed." Her eyes were wide. "But it looks brand new." "Because your son Bobby helped restore it," Jack said, pride evident in his voice. "He's our first apprentice. Spent 2 weeks learning every inch of that machine. Now he can maintain it for you and teach others to do the same." Bobby Peterson, barely 20, stepped up beside the auger. With quiet confidence, he began explaining the restoration process to the gathered farmers. Jack watched their expressions shift from skepticism to interest as the young man demonstrated knowledge that bridged old and new techniques. "This is just the beginning," Catherine addressed the crowd. "We're establishing a network of centers like this across the Midwest. Places where traditional skills aren't just preserved, they're taught, valued, and passed on." Bill Thompson, who'd been one of the loudest critics, ran his hand along a restored tractor. "And what's Wells Agricultural getting out of this? Can't imagine your board approving something that keeps small farms running." "The board doesn't control this project," Catherine stated firmly. "The Wells Family Trust does. And what we're getting is the preservation of something valuable, knowledge that took generations to accumulate." As the crowd broke into smaller groups, examining equipment and asking questions, Jack found himself beside Catherine, watching Bobby Peterson lead an impromptu lesson on auger maintenance. "They're starting to understand," she said softly. Jack nodded. "It's one thing to talk about preserving skills. It's another to see a young farmer teaching his neighbors how to keep their equipment running." Throughout the morning, more stories emerged. Ed Miller's daughter wanted to apprentice in hydraulic systems. The Anderson boys were interested in electrical training. Farmers who'd been struggling with maintenance costs saw a path forward that didn't involve crushing debt. Later, as the last visitors left, Jack and Catherine stood in the doorway of the transformed shop. His father's old sign still hung above the door, but beneath it was a new addition: Mitchell & Son Training Center, preserving agricultural heritage. "Your father would be proud," Catherine said, watching the sunset paint the equipment yard in shades of gold. "He always said a repair shop should be more than just a business," Jack replied. "It should be a place where knowledge gets passed on, where community grows stronger." A truck pulled into the yard, another farmer, another piece of equipment needing attention. But now, instead of just fixing it, they'd be teaching someone else how to prevent the problem next time, creating not just repairs, but a legacy of knowledge. "Ready for this?" Catherine asked as they walked out to meet the truck. Jack smiled, feeling the weight of his father's tools in his hands and the promise of tomorrow in his heart. Born ready. The Chicago boardroom felt colder than usual as Catherine faced down her increasingly hostile board of directors. The quarterly presentation on her screen showed rising profits, expanding operations, and improved efficiency metrics. But it was the last slide that had caused the current uproar. $1 million allocated to rural equipment maintenance education. David Harrison's voice dripped with disdain. "Ms. Wells, this pet project of yours has gone far enough. We're an agricultural corporation, not a trade school." Catherine kept her voice level, though her hands tightened on the presentation remote. "That $1 million has already saved us 3 times as much in equipment maintenance costs across our regional operations. The Mitchell training program—" "Ah, yes, Mitchell." Harrison's smile was shark-like. "The local mechanic you've suddenly made director of our new heritage program. Tell me, did he have any corporate experience before you appointed him? Any degree more advanced than a high school diploma?" Back in Nebraska, Jack was facing his own critics. The Bell and Whistle Diner had become divided territory. Those who supported the training center sat on one side, those who viewed it as corporate infiltration on the other. Today, he could feel the stares as he picked at his usual breakfast. "Heard you're hiring instructors from out of state?" Bill Thompson called from his usual spot. "Not enough local talent for Miss Wells's fancy new program?" Jack set down his coffee cup carefully. "We're hiring experienced mechanics from closing shops across 3 states, bringing their knowledge here before it's lost. Creating jobs, Bill, not taking them. And teaching corporate methods alongside the old ways?" Ed Miller chimed in. "Saw those new diagnostic computers being delivered last week." "We're teaching both," Jack answered, his patience fraying, "because both matter. You think your kids shouldn't learn new technology just because we value traditional skills?" The diner's door chimed, and Thomas Anderson walked in. These days, his presence didn't silence the room like it used to. He'd become a regular sight. Around town, But today, his expression made Jack's stomach tighten. "The board meeting isn't going well," Thomas said quietly, sliding into Jack's booth. "Harrison's pushing for a complete audit of the heritage program. He's questioning every expenditure, every hire." Jack thought of the 30 students currently learning in his shop, of the farmers who'd started bringing their equipment in for maintenance lessons instead of just repairs. Can they shut us down? Not directly. Catherine made sure of that. But they can make things difficult, very difficult. In Chicago, Catherine stood at her office window, watching the city lights come on as evening approached. Her grandfather's photo seemed to watch her from the wall, his expression both proud and concerned. "They're trying to force my hand," she told Thomas over the phone. "Harrison's group is threatening to call a shareholders' vote if I don't redirect resources to more profitable ventures." "The program is working, Catherine," Thomas replied. "The data supports everything you've claimed. Reduced maintenance costs, improved equipment longevity, higher farmer satisfaction scores. They don't care about that. They see it as a threat. Every independent farmer we help, every repair shop we keep open, goes against their vision of complete corporate consolidation." A soft knock interrupted her. Jack stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in the corporate setting but determined. He'd flown in at Thomas's request, his first time leaving the training center since it opened. "Sorry to pull you away," Catherine said, ending her call. "But I needed you to see what we're up against." Jack walked to her desk, taking in the views of corporate Chicago. "Quite a difference from the shop. 2 different worlds," she agreed. "And right now, both of them are fighting us. Because what we're doing matters," Jack said simply. "Because it's working. You should see Bobby Peterson teaching hydraulics to farmers twice his age. See their faces when they realize they can maintain their own equipment, that they're not helpless against corporate pressure." Catherine smiled, despite her exhaustion. "Tell me more." For the next hour, Jack shared stories from the training center. The widow, who now helped other farmers troubleshoot electrical systems. The teenage brothers, learning both traditional repair methods and modern diagnostics. The community growing stronger around shared knowledge. "This is what the board doesn't understand," Catherine said finally. "They see numbers, we see people, lives changed, communities preserved. So what do we do?" Catherine turned from the window, determination replacing fatigue. "We fight, but smart. Thomas is compiling data on every success, every dollar saved, every job created. And we're going to need something else." "What's that?" "Stories, not just statistics. The board needs to see what I see when I watch you teach, what your father saw when he wrote those repair manuals, the human side of what we're preserving." Jack thought of his father's notebooks, of lessons learned and passed down. "Then let's show them. All of it. The old and the new, working together." Outside her window, Chicago's corporate towers reached toward the sky, but Catherine was seeing Nebraska fields, thinking of knowledge passed down through generations, of communities fighting to survive. "Together," she agreed, and in that word was a promise that went beyond business plans and bottom lines. Late into the night, Jack sat at his father's desk. The deed to Mitchell and Son spread before him. Beside it lay Catherine's proposal, official papers that would make him full partner in the heritage program with oversight of training centers across 7 states. The stark contrast between the worn deed and the crisp corporate documents seemed to embody his current crossroads. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "A repair shop isn't just a business, son. It's a promise to the community." He wondered what his father would think of corporate partnerships and training networks, of computer diagnostics alongside manual troubleshooting. The shop was quiet at this hour, but evidence of its transformation surrounded him. New teaching stations gleamed under overhead lights. His father's old repair manuals shared shelf space with modern technical documents. In the parking lot, students' cars would fill the spaces where broken-down tractors once waited for miracle fixes. The phone on his desk buzzed. Catherine. Despite the late hour, she'd know he was still here, wrestling with the decision she'd laid before him earlier that day. "Can't sleep either." Her voice was soft, understanding. "Just thinking about what Dad would make of all this." Jack ran his hand over the deeds-worn paper. "Whether I'm betraying something by going bigger." "Tell me about him," Catherine said, and Jack could hear her settling into what was probably her own late-night office vigil. "What would he say about today's students?" Jack smiled, remembering that afternoon's class. He'd have loved watching Bobby Peterson teach that hydraulics session. Kids got a natural way of explaining things, just like Dad did, and when that group of younger farmers stayed late to practice diagnostic techniques. "Sounds like the shop is keeping its promise to the community," Catherine observed, "just in a bigger way." "Yeah, but—" Jack struggled to articulate his fears. "Managing multiple centers, corporate partnerships, training programs across states. That's not what a small-town mechanic does." "No," Catherine agreed. "It's what someone who understands the value of small-town mechanics does. Someone who can bridge both worlds." Through the window, Jack could see the Heritage Collection buildings in the moonlight. Inside them, generations of agricultural history stood preserved, not as museum pieces but as teaching tools. Each machine represented skills passed down, knowledge preserved. "The board meeting's tomorrow," Catherine reminded him gently. "Harrison's group is pushing for major changes. Having you there, showing them what we've built, what we're trying to preserve, it could make the difference." "You really think corporate executives will care about an old repair shop's legacy?" "I think they need to see what I saw that first day you fixed my tractor, what your students see when you teach them, that this isn't just about maintaining equipment, it's about maintaining a way of life." Jack looked at the class schedule for the next day. Old Man Johnson was set to demonstrate traditional carburetor rebuilding, followed by his grandson teaching computer-aided fuel injection diagnostics. The perfect blend of old and new, just as Catherine had envisioned. "Did I ever tell you about the day Dad handed me the shop keys?" Jack asked suddenly. "He said, 'Son, sometimes fixing things means knowing when to change them.' I didn't understand what he meant back then. And now?" Jack picked up the partnership papers, feeling their weight, not just in papers, but in possibility. "Now I'm thinking maybe he wasn't just talking about machines." Through the phone, he heard Catherine's quiet laugh. "Sounds like your father was a wise man. He also said I should know the difference between selling out and growing strong." Jack's fingers traced his father's signature on the old deed, that sometimes the best way to keep a promise is to find new ways to keep it. The night was giving way to dawn, painting the shop in shades of possibility. Tomorrow's students would arrive full of questions, eager to learn both the old ways and the new. In Chicago, corporate executives would debate the value of what they were building here. "Catherine, yes, I'll be on the morning flight to Chicago." He picked up his pen. "But first, I need to sign some papers." Her smile was audible in her voice. "Together?" Jack looked around the shop, at the past preserved and the future growing, at traditions maintained and horizons expanded, at the promise kept in a new way. "Together," he agreed, and began to sign. The new business cards arrived on a Tuesday morning. Jack Mitchell, Director of Agricultural Heritage Programs, Wells Mitchell Training Centers. He tucked them into his desk drawer, preferring the grease-stained hands and worn work clothes. That had always been his professional signature. But the cards represented something bigger than a title change. They represented a bridge between worlds. Catherine found him in the shop's new conference room, reviewing expansion plans with Thomas. 3 more training centers were opening across Nebraska and Iowa, each modeled on the success of the original Mitchell and Son location. Local mechanics were being hired as instructors, their knowledge preserved instead of being lost to corporate consolidation. The Kansas City location found another repair shop about to close, Thomas reported, sliding over a folder. 3rd-generation mechanic specializes in combine harvesters. His client list includes 40 family farms, Perfect timing, Catherine said, joining them at the table. The board just approved our second quarter results. Equipment maintenance costs down 30% across all participating regions. Farmer satisfaction scores at an all-time high. Jack smiled, remembering Harrison's face when they'd presented their success metrics last month. Amazing what happens when you invest in people instead of just machinery. The morning's first students were arriving. A mix of young farmers, experienced mechanics, and corporate technicians. The program had evolved to serve them all, teaching traditional skills alongside modern techniques. In the main workshop, Old Man Johnson was setting up for his weekly carburetor clinic, while his grandson prepared the computer diagnostic station next door. "Miss Wells?" a young voice called from the doorway. Bobby Peterson stood there, coveralls, already smudged with honest work. "That group from the agricultural college is here, the ones wanting to study our training methods?" Catherine nodded. "Show them to the heritage collection first, Bobby. Let them see where we're coming from before we show them where we're going." As Bobby led the visitors away, Jack watched Catherine's expression soften. "You know, when you first hired him, people thought it was just for show. Now he's teaching at 3 different centers. He reminds me of someone," Catherine teased. "A certain mechanic who understood that fixing things sometimes means fixing whole communities." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah Peterson, who'd become something of a symbol for their program's impact. The widow farmer now helped coordinate the Women's Mechanical Training Initiative, showing other female farmers that equipment maintenance wasn't just men's work. "The new group from Minnesota arrives next week," Sarah reported, her confidence a far cry from the desperate woman who'd once worried about losing her auger. 15 women from family farms, all wanting to learn basic maintenance and repairs. Outside, the morning sun gleamed off rows of equipment in various stages of restoration. Each piece would serve double duty, teaching tools for the program and working machinery for farms that needed it. The corporate efficiency experts had finally stopped arguing when they saw the numbers. Equipment lasted longer, broke down less, and performed better when operators understood how to maintain it properly. Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Dinner tonight? Need to discuss expansion plans and maybe something else." That something else had been growing between them gradually, naturally, like winter wheat taking root beneath the snow. Their shared vision had become more than just a business partnership, though neither had rushed to put words to the change. "Count on it," he texted back, then turned to greet the day's first class. Hours later, watching students practice both old and new techniques, Jack thought about the journey that had brought them here. His father's old shop had grown into something unprecedented, a place where corporate efficiency and traditional knowledge worked together instead of fighting each other. Catherine joined him by the window, their shoulders touching comfortably. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about Dad's old saying about fixing things, meaning sometimes knowing when to change them." He turned to her. "Think we've changed enough things around here?" She laughed, the sound drawing smiles from nearby students who'd grown used to seeing them together. "I think we're just getting started. The board approved funding for 3 more centers yesterday, and there's a farm equipment museum in Wisconsin that wants to partner with our restoration program." Jack pulled out one of the new business cards, looking at their names linked in the company logo. "Together?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Catherine's hand found his, grease stains and all. Together. Through the windows, they could see the past and future of American agriculture working in harmony. Restored vintage equipment beside modern machines, experienced mechanics teaching alongside young technicians, corporate resources preserving. Instead of replacing community knowledge, they had built a bridge between worlds and found each other in the crossing. The anonymous letter arrived on a frost-bitten morning, tucked among routine maintenance requests and program applications. Jack might have missed it if Thomas hadn't developed a habit of screening their mail after the first few threats had appeared. Agritechs. "Stock dropped 12 points after losing the Miller County maintenance contract," Thomas explained, handling the letter with distaste. "Someone's taking it personally." Jack scanned the typed message, its threats as crude as they were predictable. Corporate equipment dealers losing business to newly trained farmers. Parts suppliers watching orders decline as restoration skills spread. Each success of their program seemed to create new enemies. Catherine arrived as he was finishing, her expression tight. Harrison's group is making moves again. They've called an emergency board meeting for next week. What's their angle? This time? They're claiming our program violates exclusive maintenance contracts with major manufacturers. She dropped into the chair across from his desk. Never mind that those contracts are exactly the kind of monopolistic practices we're fighting against. Outside his office window, the morning's first class was gathering. Farmers, who once would have been forced to replace equipment, were learning to maintain it instead. Mechanics who might have lost their shops to corporate consolidation were now teaching others. Each success story was a threat to someone's profit margin. "Got another one of these this morning," Jack said, holding up the threatening letter. "Seems we're making all the right people nervous." Catherine's laugh held more steel than humor. "Good. Though I worry about—" She was interrupted by a commotion from the workshop floor. They hurried out to find Bobby Peterson confronting a man in an expensive suit who was photographing their diagnostic equipment. "Sir, this is private property. You can't just walk in and—" "Actually, I can." The man flashed a corporate ID. "Agritech Legal Department. We're documenting potential patent infringements in your diagnostic procedures." "The only thing you're documenting is harassment." Catherine's voice cut through the tension. "And you're trespassing. Thomas, please show this gentleman out and contact our legal team." As Thomas escorted the unwanted visitor away, Jack noticed how the students had instinctively moved to protect their equipment and training materials. These farmers and mechanics had invested more than just time in the program. They'd invested hope. "They're getting desperate," Catherine observed, watching the corporate car pull away. "Which means we're winning." "Maybe," Jack agreed. "But at what cost?" He showed her the morning's maintenance calendar. 3 different equipment dealers had suddenly cancelled their parts contracts with program participants. "They're trying to squeeze our people out." Catherine's eyes narrowed with familiar determination. "Then we adapt. Thomas, get me the independent parts suppliers directory and call Sarah Peterson. Her women's maintenance network might have some contacts." The next few days brought more challenges. Corporate inspectors appeared at random, citing obscure regulations. Banks suddenly reviewed loans to farmers participating in the program. Even the local paper, usually supportive, ran an opinion piece questioning the impact of non-standard maintenance practices on equipment warranties. But for every obstacle, their community found an answer. Farmers shared parts and equipment. Mechanics taught workarounds for proprietary systems. The very skills their program preserved proved to be their best defense against corporate pressure. Friday morning found Jack and Catherine in the Heritage Collection building, seeking perspective among the restored machines that had started everything. "My grandfather faced similar opposition," Catherine said, running her hand along her father's old tractor. "When he refused to sell to corporate buyers, they tried to force him out, called his methods outdated, his equipment obsolete. What did he do? He adapted, found allies, built a community strong enough to resist pressure." She turned to Jack with a familiar glint in her eye. "Sound familiar?" Jack thought about their growing network of training centers, each one a point of resistance against the tide of corporate consolidation. "We're not just teaching people to fix machines anymore, are we?" "We never were." Catherine's hand found his, a gesture that had become natural between them. "We're teaching them to fix the system, one skill, one farm, one community at a time." Through the window, they could see their latest class arriving, farmers, mechanics, and corporate technicians who'd chosen their side in this quiet revolution. Each person represented a small victory against the forces trying to stop them. "Harrison's board meeting is Tuesday," Catherine said quietly. They'll try to shut us down through legal channels this time. Jack squeezed her hand. Then we'll show them what we showed everyone else, that the old ways and the new can work together, that preserving skills makes more sense than replacing them. Together, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Together, he confirmed. They may have corporate power, but we have something better. What's that? A community that remembers how to fix what's broken. The Chicago boardroom fell silent as Sarah Peterson finished speaking. The widow farmer stood tall in her work clothes, deliberately chosen over more formal attire, addressing some of the most powerful executives in agricultural business. Last year, I was 3 months away from losing my farm, she said, her voice steady. Today, I run a profitable operation, train other farmers in equipment maintenance, and haven't had a major breakdown in 8 months. That's what the Wells Mitchell program did for me. That's what it's doing for hundreds of others. Catherine sat at the head of the table, Thomas at her right, Jack at her left. Before them lay irrefutable evidence of their program's success. Maintenance costs down 40% across participating farms, equipment lifespan extended by years, farmer satisfaction scores at record highs. But it was the human stories that held the board's attention. Mrs. Peterson, Harrison spoke with careful neutrality, these results are impressive, but surely you understand the importance of standardized maintenance procedures, warranty compliance. I understand staying in business, Sarah cut in. I understand keeping families on their land. And I understand that before this program, corporate agriculture's only solution was to buy us out when we couldn't afford their maintenance contracts. The door opened and Bobby Peterson entered, now the program's youngest master instructor. He carried a tablet displaying real-time data from their training centers across 7 states. Each point on the map represented a farm saved, a skill preserved, a community strengthened. Our diagnostic compliance rates actually exceed manufacturer standards, Bobby explained, his confidence a testament to how far he'd come. We're not bypassing corporate procedures. We're enhancing them with traditional knowledge that prevents problems before they occur. Jack watched the board members exchange glances. They were business people, used to measuring success in profit margins and market share. But the evidence before them spoke a language even they couldn't ignore. The numbers are compelling, one director admitted. Equipment maintenance costs across Wells Holdings have decreased significantly. Farmer retention rates are up. Even our insurance actuaries are impressed by the reduced failure rates. Harrison wasn't finished. But the cost of maintaining these training centers, the resources invested in preserving obsolete... Obsolete? Jack stood, drawing all eyes. Let me tell you about obsolete. Last month, a corporate maintenance team told Frank Miller his combine was beyond repair, wanted him to take out a loan for a new one. Our students fixed it in 2 days, using skills that your efficiency experts said were outdated. He walked to the window looking out over Chicago's skyline. You see liability in teaching farmers to maintain their own equipment. We see independence. You see inefficiency in preserving old skills. We see wisdom that's kept American farms running for generations. Catherine joined him, their shoulders touching in familiar solidarity. The board has a choice to make, she said quietly. The data proves our program works. The testimonials show its value. You can either support what we're building or watch us continue succeeding without your approval. A murmur ran through the board members. They'd come expecting to shut down what they saw as an expensive experiment. Instead, they'd found a revolution in agricultural sustainability that was already too successful to stop. Perhaps, the chairman said slowly, it's time to re-evaluate our position. Mr. Harrison, your concerns about standardization and efficiency were valid, but the results speak for themselves. Ms. Wells, Mr. Mitchell, it seems you've created something quite remarkable. Outside the boardroom, after the votes were counted and the expansion approved, Jack found Catherine staring out over the city. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked, a smile playing at his lips. Just thinking about that first day you fixed my tractor, she said. How far we've come since then, and how far we have to go, he guessed. She turned to him, her eyes bright with possibilities. The board's approval means we can implement the full national program. Every agricultural state, Jack. Training centers, restoration programs, community support networks. Everything we dreamed of. Thomas approached with a tablet displaying messages from their training centers. News of the board's decision had spread quickly, and celebrations were breaking out across their network. Sarah and Bobby Peterson were already planning an expansion of the women's training program. Old Man Johnson was offering his private collection of vintage equipment for restoration classes. You did it, Thomas said simply. You proved that preserving the old ways while embracing the new isn't just good ethics, it's good business. Jack looked at Catherine, seeing in her eyes the same mix of triumph and determination he felt. We did it, he corrected. All of us together. As if to emphasize his point, more messages poured in from their centers across the country. Farmers, mechanics, and instructors celebrating not just a corporate victory, but the validation of everything they'd been fighting for. Together, Catherine agreed, reaching for his hand. In that touch was the promise of more battles to fight, more skills to preserve, more communities to build. But also the certainty that they'd face it all as they had from the start, side by side, fixing what was broken, preserving what was precious, building something that would last for generations to come. 1 year after the board's approval, Jack stood before a new class of students in the expanded Mitchell Training Center. The familiar scent of oil and metal filled the air, but something else hung there too. Possibility. 50 fresh faces looked back at him, each representing a different story, a different path that had led them here. My father used to say that fixing things was about more than just replacing broken parts, he began, holding up his dad's old repair manual. It was about understanding how things work, why they fail, and how to prevent those failures in the first place. Today, we're not just learning to fix machines. We're learning to preserve knowledge that took generations to accumulate. Catherine slipped quietly into the back of the room, watching Jack with pride. She'd just returned from opening their 20th training center in Minnesota, but she never missed the first day of a new class at the original Mitchell location. Each of you is here for a different reason, Jack continued. Some of you are third-generation mechanics, hoping to keep your family shops alive. Others are farmers wanting to maintain your own equipment. Some come from corporate backgrounds, looking to bridge the gap between old wisdom and new technology. He gestured to the workshop behind him, where restored vintage equipment sat alongside modern machinery. In this program, we don't see conflict between tradition and progress. We see opportunity. Every piece of equipment here has a story. Every repair technique we teach carries the wisdom of those who came before us. The students gathered around as Jack demonstrated the day's first lesson, a complex hydraulic repair that combined traditional diagnostic methods with modern testing equipment. Bobby Peterson, now a full instructor, moved among them offering guidance, while Sarah Peterson led a smaller group through electrical troubleshooting techniques. Catherine made her way to Jack's office afterward, where photographs now covered the walls, graduating classes, restored machines, saved farms. A new generation of agricultural mechanics, armed with both old wisdom and new knowledge. The Department of Agriculture called, she said, settling into what had become her usual chair. They want to use our training program as a model for a national initiative, preserving agricultural heritage while promoting sustainable farming practices. Jack smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that first repair of her tractor. What did the board say about that? Harrison actually supported it. Seems saving millions in maintenance costs changed his tune about obsolete knowledge. She pulled out a tablet, showing him their latest success metrics. But this might interest you more. Remember that list we made of repair shops at risk of closing? The ones we wanted to save? Must have been 50 shops across the Midwest. We've preserved 43 so far. turned them into satellite training. Centers kept their expertise alive. The other 7, she smiled, well, their owners are here today, starting a new chapter instead of closing their doors. Through the window they could see Old Man Johnson teaching a group of young farmers the art of engine timing. His grandson worked alongside him, adding computer diagnostic techniques to his grandfather's traditional methods. The synthesis of old and new, exactly as they'd envisioned. Got something to show you, Jack said, pulling out a drawer. He handed Catherine a leather-bound book, his father's original repair manual. But now it had company. Next to it sat volumes of carefully documented knowledge, repair techniques, troubleshooting methods, stories of innovative fixes passed down through generations. The legacy library, he explained. Every instructor, every experienced mechanic, every farmer with specialized knowledge, they're all contributing. We're not just teaching skills anymore, Catherine. We're preserving wisdom. She ran her hand over the books, understanding the value they represented. This is what my grandfather meant about farming being more than just business. It's about passing down knowledge, protecting something precious. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas entered with news from their latest expansion efforts. The Kansas network is officially online, 23 shops connected, sharing knowledge, supporting local farms, and the apprenticeship program has 300 applications for the spring semester. Catherine's eyes met Jack's, sharing a moment of quiet triumph. They'd created something that would outlast them both. A network of knowledge, a community of learning, a bridge between past and future. There's something else, Thomas added with a slight smile. That corporate efficiency expert who said we'd never last. His daughter just enrolled in our program. Says she wants to learn real farming from people who understand the land. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the metal of restored tractors and combines. Each one represented a victory, not just over time and where, but over the idea that newer always meant better, that progress required abandoning the wisdom of the past. Jack thought about that first day, when a supposedly unfixable tractor brought Catherine Wells into his shop. How fixing one broken machine had led to fixing something much bigger, the gap between tradition and progress, between corporate efficiency and human wisdom. You know what this means? He asked Catherine, gesturing to their growing legacy library. She nodded, understanding as always. It means what we built here will last, that the knowledge we're preserving will be passed down to people who understand its value. Together? He asked, though after all this time he knew the answer. Together, she confirmed, her hand finding his. Today, tomorrow, and for generations to come. 2 years to the day after Jack first fixed Catherine's tractor, they stood together in the morning sun, watching students arrive at the Mitchell Training Center. The old shop had grown, but Jack's father's sign still hung proud above the door, now accompanied by a newer addition, preserving agricultural heritage for future generations. Remember that first day? Catherine asked, her shoulder touching his, in what had become their natural way of standing together. You thought I was just another farmer with a broken tractor, and you thought I was just another small-town mechanic, Jack replied, smiling at the memory. Guess we both had bigger plans in mind. The vintage tractor that had brought them together sat restored in a place of honor near the entrance, not as a museum piece but as a working reminder of their journey. Students often gathered around it during breaks, listening to Jack tell the story of how fixing one machine had led to fixing an entire system. Sarah Peterson's truck pulled in, followed by a line of vehicles bearing the Wells Mitchell Training Program logo. The morning special class was about to begin, a celebration of their 100th successful shop preservation and the graduation of their 1,000th student. "Miss Wells!" Bobby Peterson called out, hurrying over with a tablet. "The satellite! Feed is ready. All 40 training centers are connected for the joint ceremony." Inside, the main workshop had been transformed. Screens showed faces from training centers across the country. Mechanics, farmers, instructors, and students, all part of the network they'd built together. Old Man Johnson sat in the front row, his grandson beside him, both wearing their instructor badges with pride. Thomas stood at the podium, handling the formal part of the ceremony with his usual efficiency. But today's real meaning went beyond certificates and achievements. It was about the community they'd created, the knowledge they'd preserved, the future they'd secured. 2 years ago, Catherine began her address, I brought a broken tractor to a small repair shop. I was looking for someone who understood that fixing things means more than just replacing parts. What I found was a partner who shared my vision of preserving something precious. Jack joined her at the podium, their presence together symbolizing the bridge they'd built between corporate resources and community wisdom. My father taught me that every machine has a story, he added. Every repair is a lesson learned. Every skill passed down is a future preserved. Today, we're not just celebrating graduates and saved shops. We're celebrating the proof that the old ways and the new can work together. The ceremony continued, each graduate receiving not just a certificate, but a copy of the ever-growing legacy. Library, young mechanics trained in both traditional skills and modern technology, farmers equipped to maintain their own equipment, corporate technicians who'd learned to value the wisdom of experience. Later, as the celebration wound down, Jack and Catherine walked to the Heritage Collection building. The afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold, much like that first day when he'd worked on her tractor. You know, Jack said, Dad used to say that some things can't be fixed with just tools and parts. Sometimes you need vision, patience, and a little faith in what's possible. Catherine smiled, understanding as always. Your father was a wise man. Think he'd be proud of what his shop became? I think he'd say we did exactly what a repair shop is supposed to do. Fix what's broken, preserve what's precious, and pass on knowledge to those who will need it next. Through the window, they could see the next generation of students gathering around Old Man Johnson, absorbing stories and skills that might otherwise have been lost. In the distance, the modern grain silos of Wells Agricultural Holdings rose against the sky, no longer a symbol of corporate takeover, but of progress balanced with preservation. Together? Catherine asked, though after all this time, it wasn't really a question. Jack took her hand, feeling the familiar calluses that matched his own. In that touch was everything they'd built and everything still to come, a future where wisdom wasn't lost to progress, where communities grew stronger through shared knowledge, where fixing things meant more than just replacing broken parts. Together, he confirmed, always. And in the late afternoon light, surrounded by the machines they'd saved and the legacy they'd built, they stood as they had that first day. Two people who understood that sometimes the most important things to fix are the connections between a past and future, between progress and wisdom, between two hearts that beat to the rhythm of honest work and shared dreams.